I'm now in the realms of contemporary Pilates with one of my most favorite core stability exercises. It is still part of my own practice. So for a moment, I just let you guess what it could be. Guessed it? It's a leg float. I love leg float. It has so many interesting variations. It's just a brilliant, simple, yet not easy core stabilization exercise. So now I would like to do 3 variations, talk about the differences in these 3 variations, the intentions we have during the training, and also why I avoid the terms beginner, intermediate, advanced whenever I can. So if you'd like to join me, please join me. The leg float is a supine exercise with the pelvis and the spine in a centered alignment. So the pelvis is neutral for your body, and then the spine is aligned with its natural curves maintained. The knees are about at the 90-degree angle, the legs hip distance and apart. You can place your hands onto your lower abdominals and just feel the tone in your abdominals right now. Should be very low, so there's not much happening. A little bit of bass tone, but that's about it. So now, before we go into the movement, engage your abdominals. Pelvic floor first, then abdominals, and engage fully. And you feel a change of tone underneath your hands. So the muscles contract, there is more tone. Now we are working with scales, just to make it clear. So this is a 10. When you have engaged your abdominals and pelvic floor muscles to maximum, this is a 10 on your scale. And now release. Soften completely. You're again at, say, a 1. And now engage very lightly. Pelvic floor, abdominals very lightly. Make it a 3 on your scale. So now you have engaged pelvic floor, and we are aiming to engage deep. Transverse abdominis. Maybe the lower portion of your internal obliques, but we're emphasizing here transverse abdominis. Very light engagement. Key to dynamic lumbar pelvic stabilization. Stay with that 3 for a moment. Let the breath flow. Engage to 10. Make it a 10. Feel that increased tone. Now you have also engaged your oblique abdominals, internal and external oblique abdominals. So this is a 10. It's more superficial. It's still working deep, hopefully, but it's a lot more superficial. Release to a 2, and you're deeper. Not working less, just more differentiated. Relax completely. And now let's go into the movement. So from a completely relaxed position, or as relaxed as you can be in this centered supine position, engage lightly. Make it a 3 again. And then, of course, adjust as need be. And lift one leg into a tabletop position. You can let the breath flow naturally. So tabletop for now is knee above the hip joint. And then lower the foot. You're moving from the hip joint only. Change side. Our aim is to engage as deeply as possible in this leg float up. So deep means you're working low on your scale. You make it the lowest number possible. That still allows you to keep the pelvis and the lower spine in a centered alignment. The goal is deep, so you're strengthening core stabilization muscles like the transverse abdominis. Now let's go to the second variation. So one leg is in tabletop. You're very low on your scale, 3, just for consistency. And now engage more. Make it a 5, 6, 7, 8. Lift the second leg. Now it's probably a 9. If your knees are directly above the hips and not closer to your chest, this is fairly high up on the scale. Now you have your oblique abdominals also engaged. When you now step the first foot down onto the floor and your foot is on the floor, you lessen the activity, make it a 3 again, and then your other foot lowers down, and you can make it a 1. Take the leg up again, so it's a 3 to stabilize the lumbar pelvic area. Increase 7, 8, lift the second leg, 9. Here it's say a 9. And then the first foot lowers, you keep it a 9 until your foot is on the floor. Make it a 3. Lower your other foot, and again, when your foot is on the floor, make it a 1. Let's go one more time. So we have various degrees of activity in the second leg float variation. It's an alternating leg float. This is very refined. In terms of differentiation, great refinement. And in terms of lumbar pelvic stability also, this is 3-dimensional stabilization of the pelvis and the lower back, because you're alternating the legs. So this is certainly a fairly challenging variation. Now let's compare this to variation 3, where you're taking both legs up into a tabletop position. So you're working now very high up on your scale. It's, say, the 9, or maybe it's even a 10. And then leg float down is moving from tabletop down. Of course, your deep core stabilizing muscles, we are still aiming to engage them, but your obliques are strongly engaged. They are getting stronger now, which is fantastic. But now we are working more on the surface. And if I'm aiming for strength to really tone my oblique abdominals, this is the variation I choose. It still requires a lot of stabilization to not tilt the pelvis or hyperextend the spine, clearly. But in terms of 3-dimensional dynamic stabilization, this is probably easier. In terms of differentiation, this is easier. I just engage. If I'm strong enough, I can hold it, and that's it. But if I do variation 2, let's do that one more time. I'm differentiating, so this is a different quality of muscular coordination and differentiation, and more 3-dimensional lumbar pelvic stability. If I do the leg float up, just with one leg at a time, I'm saying very low. Again, it's very differentiated. It's certainly a skill in movement. So they are equally valuable. They are equally refined. They just have very different qualities and work on different levels. So it really depends what you are aiming for in movement, and then that's the exercise variation I choose. Neither is easier than the other. They all have their own unique challenges. I hope that made sense and it was clearly feelable in your body.